As current events indicate that the church that professes to believe the truth for these last days is in a crisis, there seems to be a literal fulfillment of the 2,300 days of Daniel 8:14 that confirms that we are living in the appointed time of the end. To understand this, I like to invite you to the study on the daily as well as on the sanctuary and the host trodden underfoot. My name is Lothar Hillenkötter, and with that I like to invite you now to the study part 4 on from 666 to 777. We will take a close look at the Tamid that's used in Daniel, the daily, as he describes it. And I present a probable literal fulfillment of the 2,300 days of Daniel 8:14, which makes clear that we are living at the end of time. In Daniel 8:13, Daniel hears two saints speaking to each other, and they communicate about the daily. They ask, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily? The word sacrifice was added by the translator, that's why I scratched it. And the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. But before we get into the study of this, I would like to ask you to bow your head for a word of prayer so that we can ask the Holy Spirit to guide us in our study. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your word. And you have promised that the ones that read in your word and that keep those things that are in, that they will receive a blessing. And we would like to be partakers of this blessing. And Lord, you have also said that you will do nothing except you reveal your secrets unto his servants, the prophets. And with that, we need an understanding of what your prophets are saying. And for that, we need your Holy Spirit, because he is the one who guides us into all truth. So cleanse us from all unrighteousness, clothe us with Christ's righteousness, and fill us with your Holy Spirit. I plead in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. In the last part, we looked at Daniel 12:12, where it says there's a blessing on the one that waiteth and cometh to 1,335 days. I showed you that the president that it's going to be elected in the United States with the upcoming elections, if he would act as a dictator on day one and enforce the 10 Commandments as the foundational law of the nations, which the laws, unfortunately, would be not the biblical 10 Commandments, and then on Sunday, January 26th, which would be the first Sunday after the inauguration of the new president, that could be day one, or would be day one of the 1,035-day timeline, which would end then on September 21st, 2028. And that would be considered midnight, and that's the time when the seventh angel pours out his last vial into the air, and there will be voices and thunders and lightnings and a great earthquake. So it's the announcement of the absolute end. And if we pay attention to it in the projected appointed times, we realize that that is the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, in 2028. So with that, it would fall into the fall festivals. The first feast for the fall festivals is the Feast of Trumpets, and then 15 days later we have the Feast of Tabernacles, and like I showed on this slide, the 1 hour for the judgment of Babylon is prophetically 15 days, and that would bring us then to the Feast of Tabernacles on October 5, 2028. And then if we use the seventh seal from Revelation 8:21, which is about half an hour, and that brings us 7 days later to October 11, 2028. So the silence in heaven is the time when all the redeemed with Christ will move up to heaven. The 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles is the day when heaven will be opened, and it is associated, as we read, with the voice of many waters and of great thunder. With that, the appointed times for the fall festival would be fulfilled with the Feast of Tabernacles and the 8th day of the assembly. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, will have to find its fulfillment beforehand, as there's no atonement left by midnight. Midnight, as well as the opening of heaven on the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, is associated with thunder. And about thunder we read also in the book of Revelation 10, or in the chapter 10 of Revelation. And there are 7 thunders mentioned, and thunder represents, according to 1 Samuel 2:10, when the Lord will thunder upon his adversaries and judge the ends of the earth. But what we read about in Revelation 10, those 7 thunders are sealed up, so they are not related to these 7 thunders mentioned here, because they are not written down as we read. In Daniel 12, we also see that things are sealed till the time of the end, and afterwards many shall be purified and made white and tried. So if we read the whole context, we see that the scene is very similar to Revelation 10. And with that, there's a high probability that there's a relationship to the 7 sealed thunders. In addition to these 7 sealed thunders, we have 3 revealed thunders. In the book of Revelation, we have altogether 7 times mentioning of thunder and thunderings, and we have seen already a midnight as well as the time when heaven opened. What we still have to explain is Revelation 4, verse 5 and 6, verse 1, which is related to the judgment of the dead. I believe that the Day of Atonement in 1844 marked the beginning of the investigative judgment of the dead, and that actually represented the beginning of the cleansing of the sanctuary. And that's related to Daniel 8:14, where the 2,300 days are mentioned and their fulfillment according to the year-day principle, which is demonstrated here on this slide. And as this is so far in the past, I will not go into it any further from here. So we have now 3 revealed thunders, but there is 1 verse more that mentions the thunder, and that's Revelation 8, verse 5, where it talks about the angel took the censer and it filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. This is a scene that brings us actually to the sanctuary. And as Psalm 77 verse 13 says, "Thy way, O Lord, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? Let us see if we find help in the sanctuary in the book of Revelation, as it's talked about there." In part 3, I took you already to the heavenly scene from Revelation 8, verse 4, where the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel, he is representing here Christ, who entered the most holy place in 1844 with the incense in his hands. And in verse 3, we read where Christ enters the most holy place to accept the prayers of the saints, and that was then relating to Pentecost in 31 AD. On the typical Day of Atonement, the high priest entered 3 times the most holy place, as we read in Leviticus 16. And the first time he enters with a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar, and both of his hands are full of sweet incense. So he does not go in with blood. He only goes in with blood the second time and the third time. So going back to the heavenly scene in Revelation 8, we read then in verse 5, the next step, the angel is doing, or Christ is doing. The angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar, so he's back in the holy place, and cast it into the earth. So he's the censer, and he took fire and cast the fire onto the earth. This scene is also described, I believe, by Ezekiel in chapter 10, where it says, He spake unto the man clothed in linen, and said, Fill thine hand with coals of fire, and scatter them over the city. And that city is Jerusalem, God's people. And in verse 5 it mentions then that the sound of the cherubim's wings was heard even to the outer court, which means the earth, as the voice of the Almighty God when he speaketh. And when God speaks, we know from Job 40, that's thunder. And that's what we talked about in Revelation 10, the seven sealed thunders. And at the end of Revelation 10, it says, Thou must prophesy again. And in chapter 11 in Ezekiel, if we go back to him, there at the end he is encouraged to prophesy against them, against the leaders of God's people. He is supposed to prophesy. The question is, when does this scene happen? And what is the sign that Christ gave for the beginning of the judgment of the living? I believe we find it in Mark 13 and Matthew 24, where it talks about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. And he says, standing where he ought not, let him that readeth understand, and flee into the mountains. From Daniel 12 we understand that things are sealed till the time of the end, and that many shall be purified and made white and tried. And there it talks about then the daily, and that it shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate is being set up, and that there will be 1,290 days. I've showed you before several times that the daily that's associated with the transgression of desolation, or the abomination that makes desolate, in the book of Daniel occurs 3 times, in Daniel 8, 11, and 12. And in 8 and 11, we certainly know that it's associated with the Romans, first with the destruction of Jerusalem, and the second application with the Middle Ages, when the Waldensian Sabbath keepers were being persecuted. So for the final fulfillment, I believe we have to look again for the man of Rome standing where it ought not. And I believe that was in America, in the White House, when he, and in the Congress and the United Nations, when he presented Laudato Si on the Day of Atonement 2015. And it was announced as a whirlwind tour by the journalists, just like we read in Daniel 11 verse 40, like a whirlwind. So the proclamation of Laudato Si in the United States, with the Sunday like the Jewish Sabbath in its Laudato Si, that is can be considered as voices, thunderings, and lightnings. With that, I believe that God revealed the first sealed thunder on the Day of Atonement 2015, when Pope Francis announced his Laudato Si in the United States. And with that, the end of the judgment of the dead was clear, and the purifying of the living began. And that purifying of the living we also see described in Malachi 3, where he sits there as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he shall purify the sons of Levi. So it's starting with the royal priesthood, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. With that, I believe that Revelation 8, verse 5, when the angel takes fire from the altar and throws it to the earth, is related to that Day of Atonement in 2015. And that fire we felt, when we look at verse 6, the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. There were fires worldwide, certainly in 2017, California, Portugal or Europe, the Amazon, Australia, everywhere. With this, I'd like to encourage everyone to take a second look at the work of the high priest on the Day of Atonement that's talked about in Leviticus 13. In the fifth step, I believe, that's representing Pentecost, when Christ enters the holy place. And when he leaves that goes into the most holy place, it's 1844 on the Day of Atonement, and he leaves again that one, going back to the holy place on the Day of Atonement 2015. A study on this I published several years, and I would encourage everyone who has an interest in the sanctuary, understanding what's happening there, to look at this video. Unpacking Compacted Prophecy. So let's go back now to the things that are sealed till the time of the end, which includes the daily, which, the wise, it says, will understand it. And so we need to be purified and made white and tried in order to understand it. For this Christ promised us in John 16 the Comforter. He said, I will send him unto you, and he will reprove the world of sin, and he's the Spirit of truth who will guide us into all truth, and he will show us the things to come. That's consistent with Amos 3:7. Surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants the prophets. In Revelation 10, John talks not about the secret of God, but about the mystery of God, which is probably the same. And he says that in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished. So that's with the sound of the seventh trumpet, as he has declared to his servants the prophets. The prophetic book in the Old Testament, and that he's probably referring to, must be the book of Daniel. We read there, for example, in Daniel 7, where the four beasts first came out of the sea. But in verse 17, when Daniel gets the explanation, he gets these great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. So we can expect something to happen with four kings coming out of the earth. So it's referring to the time of the end, probably after the healing of the wound from Revelation 13. And in Daniel 8, when Daniel receives the explanation for the vision he had previously, it says, Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. And then in verse 19, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. Isn't that towards the end of the world? For at the time appointed the end shall be. So there's a time appointed for the end. In Daniel 8:14, it talks about the cleansing of the sanctuary with the 2,300 days. Could there be a second fulfillment of it? And if we go to Daniel 9, there talks about 70 weeks to make an end of sins. We still have sin, so it must be still in the future. And to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy and anoint the most holy. The sealing up of the vision and prophecy is the opening or revealing of the mystery of God. In Daniel 10, with the explanation, it goes on and it says, Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days. The latter here is a reference to the uttermost end of time, and it confirms it, for yet the vision is for many days. And in chapter 11, And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge and to make them right, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So it's a time of the end. It's a time of an appointed end. So we will have an appointed time again. And in verse 12, or chapter 12, verse 13, Daniel shall stand up in his lot at the end of the days. The end of the days is still ahead of us, I believe. And so with that, we have something to understand here. Sometime before the spring of 2019, the cry went out, and the time is at hand. Because of the sign that happened in the fall of 2015, when the Pope Francis was announcing Laudato Si on the Day of Atonement in the United States. But it did not come that way. The appointed time apparently was delayed, just like it reads in Habakkuk above, where it says, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time." And the time there refers to Moed, feast days or festive seasons. But at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. So there's a delay of the crisis, but the delay is meant to be to warn God's people. So that time was a time to wake up. And it says in Daniel 12:12, "Blessed is he that waiteth," just like we talked about in Habakkuk, "and cometh to the 1305 and 30 days. So there's a blessing in this waiting time if you stick with it, if you wake up during this time, and if you fill your cups with oil. And as there is a high probability that the 1335 days will end in the fall of 2028 on the Feast of Trumpets, then we know very shortly that Daniel will stand in his lot. And we see then this fulfillment come to pass. And then it makes sense that the appointed time from Daniel 8 will begin. And then there will also be a second fulfillment of the 70 weeks talked about in Daniel 9:24, and where it makes an end of sin. So 2028, by the fall, the universe will be purified from sin. The things talked about in Daniel 10 and Daniel 11 will then also come to its final fulfillment. And when would be a clear sign that the appointed time began? I believe it would be, according to Daniel 7:17, when the first beast that Daniel saw originally coming out of the sea, when the second fulfillment comes out of the earth. According to Revelation 13:11, I would expect that to happen when the lamb-like beast comes out of the earth and speaks like a dragon. In my understanding of prophecy, that lamb-like beast coming out of the earth is the United States of America. And when it speaks like a dragon, that's referring to a national Sunday law being on the books. And I see a high probability that this will happen with the next election. And so the day of inauguration could be the beginning of this time. And then it would lead to the fulfillment of all the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, the final fulfillment of it, leading to the purification of the universe from sin. It confirms what we read in Selected Messages, Volume 3. The law of God is made void, and the crisis comes. And in the next paragraph, it reads, "Increased light will shine upon all the grand truth of prophecies." So that's all the big prophecies that had a fulfillment in the past will have another fulfillment. And in the Bible Commentary, Volume 4, we read, "The light that Daniel received direct from God was given especially for these last days. The visions he saw in the banks of the Ulai and the Hiddekel, the great rivers of Shinar, are now in the process of fulfillment, and all the events foretold will soon have come to pass." This was written in 1896. So quite a long time after their first fulfillment. When we look now at Daniel 8, we read about that Daniel is still in Babylon at that time, and he receives a vision. It's a second vision. And in the vision, he sees himself in Shushan. That's today the capital of Iran. We can identify it by the facts that are written there about the river of Ulai, which we read about before. And while he's there, he receives a vision about a ram with two horns horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, it reads, and the higher came up last. So it's Medo-Persia and Persia coming up last. And if we look now historically at our time, there was always that region was always troublesome, especially since 1990 with Iraq initially, but that was always pushed down by the United States in combination with the Commonwealth. But right now it's the Iran that's really causing trouble in that region. And then if we read on, we read about a he-goat that comes from the west on the face of the whole earth, and it touched not the ground. So it sounds like at that time it was Alexander the Great in the past, but if it would be a second fulfillment from the west, it seems like the United States of America, and it does not touch the ground. So it's an air attack coming. And that goat has a notable horn, so a significant present today, I would guess. And he came to the ram that had two horns, yeah, and it smote the ram and brake his two horns, and there was none, we read, that could deliver the ram out of his hand. But the great horn that was broken, and for it says, came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. And these four winds of heaven are mentioned already in Daniel 7, when the first vision is coming. And there were four winds of the heaven, they strove upon the great sea. But like I told you before, the explanation in Daniel 7, verse 17, talks about four beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. So it hints at the future fulfillment. So that's why I say when the wound is healing and the United States will enforce a national Sunday law, that's why I believe the crisis will come to pass then. So how will the story continue? We read already in Daniel 8, verse 8, that the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And I expect that to be the next president of the United States, who will be strong for some time, but he will be broken very soon afterwards, because it says, for it came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. In the past, that was the lion with eagle's wings that came up out of the sea, followed by a bear, and then a leopard, and then a horrible creature. And out of that came out a little horn, yeah. And here we have now, what could that be in the future? The eagle probably represents the United States, and the lion, the Commonwealth. So it will not be the United States anymore by itself, but there will be some rulership between them, or some relationship between them, a mixture between the Commonwealth and the United States. The bear most likely would be Russia, and the leopard, who could that be? I believe it will be China. They used to have, I think, a wolf as a symbol for the army, but several years ago it was changed to a leopard. So with that, I believe that China would take that role. And then the terrible animal that's being described in Daniel 7 most likely would be the European Union, and that little horn will be, like in the past, the papacy. In verse 10 we read that the little horn waxed great even to the host of heaven. The host of heaven, that's God's army on earth, so that's his church. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. So some of the people in the church and the stars that are messengers, so must be the preachers, they will be falling to the ground and being stamped stamped upon. And then in verse 11 we read, "And he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down." Before I explain this, we have to explore the daily, and we talk about this later then. And then we read in verse 12, "And an host was given him to the little horn against the daily by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered." And then we hear two saints talking to each other, asking themselves, "How long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot?" And there we receive an answer. "And unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." So it gives us a time frame for the end time events, I believe, especially when we look then at the last verse there that I wrote down, verse 17, "For at the time of the end shall be the vision." And in verse 19 it confirms it. It didn't fit on the slide, but I mentioned it before, and that it will be the last end of indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. As we look now at our timelines, we realize that the 2,300 days for the daily and the sanctuary and host to be trodden underfoot have to end at midnight. And so if we calculate back 2,299 days from there, we come to June 6, 2022. To understand what's happening now, we have to really understand the daily. And in Hebrew, the daily is called the tamid, and it means continuity, something that's always there, continual employment, daily, nevermore or evermore, perpetual, an indefinite extension. At least 2/3 of the times it's used in connection with the sanctuary and also with the daily sacrifice, a regular sacrifice. But Daniel uses it not as such. He uses it as a noun, while normally it's been used as an adjective. Altogether, Daniel uses the tamid in his book 5 times. The last time he uses it, it's in Daniel 12, and there it's associated with a timeline of 1,290 days, which we will explore later. And the second last time is in Daniel 11, verse 31, which had its primary or initial fulfillment in the Middle Ages. But if we look there at the beginning, it says, or at verse 29, it says, "At the time appointed he shall return." And so it's an indication that the things that happened in the Middle Ages will repeat itself. Now let us explore what the daily, the tamid, means for us. In Exodus 25 it's first mentioned, and it says there, "And thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me always." Showbread, that's a symbol for the Word of God. So we should have the Word of God always before us. And then in chapter 25 it's about the pure olive oil. That's the Holy Spirit, and we need to have that daily, always, to be a light to the people around us. And in chapter 28, Aaron carries the Urim and the Thummim upon his heart, and because he bears the judgment. It's part of the plan of salvation. In chapter 29, it's used with the daily sacrifice in the morning and in the evening. As Christ fulfilled the sacrifice, what could that mean for us? Having worship morning and evening. It means spending time with him. And in chapter 30, it talks about the incense that it's burning there perpetually before the Lord. That's praying to God perpetually, being in a continual relationship with our Savior. In Leviticus, it's used in similar ways. And we read in Leviticus 24 that it shall be a statute forever in your generations. And in regards to the Sabbath, we read about it. He shall set the showbread in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. So it's an everlasting covenant, this Tamid. And so we should partake of the Word of God continually. In Numbers 9 we read about it. So it was always. The cloud covered it by day and the appearance of fire by night. So the presence of the Lord was with them day and night at the time when the tabernacle was among them. That means for us that we should always dwell in the presence of the Lord. And the Tamid is also mentioned in Numbers 28 in context with the Sabbath and also with the new moons. That should remind us of Isaiah 66, where it talks about a new heaven and a new earth, where we will gather from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another to worship the Lord. And then in Zechariah 14, we have another reference to what's happening in heaven. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts. For what? And to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So in heaven we will be keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. Shouldn't we maybe consider keeping it here to worship the Lord? Shouldn't we keep the Lord's calendar here, which he instituted at creation? And it goes on. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even unto them shall be no rain. So the Holy Spirit will not be poured out on the ones that don't come for this event. So with that, if we want to have the honor God, we should listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit to keep his feasts, especially here the Feast of Tabernacles, which certainly still has an end-time meaning. In Signs of the Times, we read about that Christ was the foundation of the whole Jewish economy. And in all his specific directions regarding the ceremonial observances, these were distinguished from the Decalogue. They were to pass away. The ceremonial observances. They were to pass away. Type was to meet antitype in the one great offering of Christ for the sins of the world. So the sacrifices were not necessary after the cross anymore. But how about the antitype? How about the meaning of these things? And regarding this, we read in Selected Messages, Volume 1, the offering of sacrifices typified Christ. So that the sacrifices, they passed away. All these sacrifices on the daily sacrifice or the special sacrifices on Sabbath, on new moons, on all the feast days, they passed away. But the meaning, did it pass away? And then let's take a look at the last sentence here. The Christian church, on the other hand, who profess the utmost faith in Christ, in despising the Jewish system, virtually deny Christ, who was the originator of the entire Jewish economy. So, which Christian church claims to have the utmost faith in Christ? Do you belong to this church? I believe I do, and it makes me sad when we despise the Jewish system, because many of us deny Christ that way. If you continue to read in Numbers 28, we read about the Passover, about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, always in conjunction with the daily sacrifice. And in addition, there were the other daily sacrifices. And then the day of the wave sheaf offering and the Feast of Weeks, which followed 7 weeks later. And in Numbers 29, we read about the Feast of Trumpets, the first feast in fall. And then it's associated with the new moon, of course, and the Day of Atonement as well. It's all associated with daily sacrifices. So we need to be continually connected with God, and He gives these days, His feast days, as a special day to receive a special blessing, to be in communion with Him. In Numbers 29, we continue then with the Feast of Tabernacles, all the 7 days of it. They're all connected with the daily sacrifices. And of the 8th day it says, "Ye shall have a solemn assembly, ye shall do no servile work therein." And then it mentions all the different sacrifices they were supposed to give in addition to the daily sacrifice. And then if we read the last verse there, "These things ye shall do unto the Lord in your set feasts, besides your vows and your freewill offerings, for your burnt offerings, and for your meat offerings, and for your drink offerings, and for your peace offerings." And Moses told the children of Israel according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So there are, in addition to the feast, there are other free will offerings and other offerings that the people are supposed to bring. And if I look at myself, what do I do there? Maybe not that I can buy my salvation, but I can show God my thankfulness for my salvation by self-sacrifice. And then if we consider to this Malachi 4, the last verses of the Old Testament, "Remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." So this is a reference not just to Christ's first coming, especially to his second coming. And we should remember the statutes and judgments in addition to all the other laws that Moses proclaimed. And those include the feast days. Now we come to the use of the word of the Tamid, not necessarily associated with the daily sacrifice, and that's where it becomes more interesting. In Deuteronomy 11, it relates to "the eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it." Upon what? Upon the land. And God wants to see if people keep His charge, His statutes, His judgments, and His commandments. More interesting, it even gets in 2 Samuel 9. There it's used twice in a reference to eating bread at the king's table. And what is the story about? It's Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, which was the son of Saul. He comes to David and he wonders if he will have to die now because he's of the other line of the former king. And David answers him and says, "Fear not, for I will surely show thee kindness for Jonathan thy father's sake, and I will restore thee all the land of Saul thy father, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually." So David invites him, Mephibosheth, who is actually lame because he had an accident as a child, and he invites him to sit at his table continually because he cannot work. So Mephibosheth, he will hear everything that's happening in the king's house, everything that's talked about at the king's table. And now if we look at the king's table, at the table that God wants to offer us, he wants us to sit on his table. Yeah, God wants us to participate in everything that's happening in His house. That's how we should look at this. Yeah, and this is repeated twice there. In verse 13 also, "Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he did eat continually at the king's table." And so it shows the importance because it's mentioned even twice. Another use of the word of the Tamid we find in Jeremiah 6 and then verse 7, where it says, "Violence and spoil is heard in her. Before me continually is grief and wounds." So God is continually grieved here. Why is he grieved? So we have to read from the beginning to find out. We read there, "Flee out of the midst of Jerusalem, blow the trumpet in Tekoa, and set up a sign of fire in Beth Serem, for evil approaches out of the north and great destruction." Yeah, so we need to flee even Jerusalem. And then in verse 3, it's very interesting. "The shepherds with their flocks shall come unto her, and they shall pitch their tents against her round about, and they shall feed every one in his place." The shepherds come against and pitch their tents against Jerusalem. What are the shepherds? The shepherds are pastors. Yeah? And they pitch their tents against Jerusalem. That's hard to buy, I think. Yeah, they besiege Jerusalem. So we got to be careful with our leadership. Yeah. And then in verse 4, "Prepare ye war against her, arise, and let us go up at noon. Woe unto us, for the day goes away, for the shadows of the evening are stretched out. Arise, and let us go by night, and let us destroy her palaces." So the shepherds are coming out in a deceptive way, because it's at night, to destroy the palaces there. What is this a reference to? Yeah, it reminds me of Jeremiah 9, where it says, "For death is come up into our windows, and is entered into our palaces, to cut off the children from without, and the young men from the streets." How does this happen now? Listen closely. Death is come up into our windows. Windows 96, Windows NT, the internet. And is entered into our palaces. That's our frontal lobe. Yeah? So we are being attacked through things deceptively. Yeah? And what destroys many of the children and the young men of the street? Certainly it's related also to pornography. And it's sad to say, but more than 50% of pastors, especially in conservative churches, are supposed to be hooked on pornography. And of course, then they are in the hands of the king of Babylon, and he can do with them whatever he wants, unless they are willingly or they're open to repent. Yeah, and that has been seen also, where people were affected with this bad habit, and but they had to confess it openly. But the ones who don't, they are in the hand of the king of Babylon. And there are certainly other sins that could make our pastors and leaders puppets in the hands of the king of Babylon. And in Jeremiah 52, I think we read about some similar situation there. And it says, "And it came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiachin, king of Judah." He was king, I believe, at the time when Daniel and his friends also were taken in captivity. And he was imprisoned there for quite a while, but then came a new king, and that was evil Merodach. And he says it lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and he brought him forth out of prison, and spake kindly unto him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings that were with him in Babylon. So he was even lifted up beyond other kings. Yeah, and then it becomes interesting, "and changed his prison garments, and he did continually eat bread before him all the days of his life." So Jehoiachin eats from the table of the king of Babylon, and he drinks his wine. And it says in verse 34, "And for his diet there was a continual diet given him of the king of Babylon, every day a portion until the day of his death, all the days of his life." So he continually was feeding from the table of the king in Babylon. He became a Babylonian because he was influenced by the doctrine there. The same event is recorded a second time in 2 Kings 25, with only one difference, that it's not the 25th day, but the 27th day of the 12th month, and otherwise the words are almost the same. And it makes clear that Jehoiakim is eating bread of the table of the king of Babylon. And that means he is dependent on him for his daily allowance. Yeah, he's in a financial obligation to him. If he doesn't have that position that he's been lifted up to, he will put back into prison, or he will die. He will not be able to have bread on his table. And so there's a financial dependency that's being described here. In the first chapter of the book Daniel, we see how Daniel and his friends make a better choice. There talks about it that the king appointed to Daniel and his friends provisions of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank. And they were supposed to do this for 3 years, for the 3 years of their education. But they decided not to defile themselves. They did not want to do this because it would have been idolatry, because those things were dedicated to the gods. And so with that, they felt they couldn't do it, and by possibility of being even killed for their choice, they stood up against it. And the word daily there is not the word tamid, but it's the word day by day. But it shows their dependency on this for their lives. God rewarded them for their choice, and they, when they were tested later on by the king, they were wiser than the others. And Daniel, we read, continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Obadiah 1 also talks about a choice we have to make because the day of the Lord is near. And we have to choose, do we drink from the holy mountain, or do we drink from the table of the king in Babylon, basically? And the ones who drink continually from the wrong source, they will receive their reward. The tamid is also used in regards to the love between husband and wife, and it's used also for a happy family. My son, keep thy father's commandment and forsake not the law of thy mother. Bind them continually upon thine heart. That makes it a happy family. And then another place where it's becomes clear that it's a matter of choice. Happy is the man that feareth alway. But he that hardeneth his heart shall fall into mischief. So we have to make a choice. Do we want to be happy and fear the Lord, or will we harden our hearts? And this word happy is the same one that's being used by Daniel in Daniel 12:12. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. So if we fear the Lord always, continually, and drink from his holy mountain, and not from the table of the king of Babylon, then we have this blessing, and that's what the tamid is about. The first ones to make a wrong choice, we know, were our first parents, Adam and Eve. And Eve, she took the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She was deceived. But Adam then took it out of her hand because he loved Eve more than he loved God. And what happened then? In verse 8 we read, they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And that cool, that word is in the spirit, in the word ruach, it's spirit, wind, breath, courage, mind, anger. So the Spirit of God withdrew and it became cool around them. This word ruach for the cool of the day we also find in the creation account. It's the Spirit of God that moved upon the face of the waters. And the word God there is the word Elohim, plural, the gods, the supreme God. So when the Spirit of God withdraws because he's rejected, the cool of the day is felt. And that's what Christ, I believe, talks about in Matthew 24. Because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And I believe that the Queen of Sheba, who heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord and visited him, will be one of the ones that will be saved, because she sat on the table of the King Solomon, and she witnessed about the king's wisdom, and that's referring to the wisdom of God. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Are we these men that listen to the wisdom of God and hand it on? It must be of importance, because in 2 Chronicles 9 it's repeated, the same situation. And the word happy that is used there, it is the same word as the word blessed in Daniel 12:12. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to 1,305 and 30 days. And if we look now to the right side of the slide, in 1 Chronicles 16, we have the word tamid used several times in that chapter, and it refers to priests, faithful watchmen, and that let people know the truth, coming from the king's table, from God's word. There's so many references to the tamid that I want to point out now maybe one of my favorite ones. In Psalm 71, be thou my strong habitation, whereunto I may continually resort. Thou hast given command to save me, for thou art my rock and my fortress. And that's also a reference then, or it's used in Nehemiah 4, verse 20. In what place, therefore, ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us. Our God shall fight for us. He will fight for us. If our praise will be continually on our mouth, and if we will continually hope in him. That's my prayer for all of us. To express the tamid in another way, I would say it's the habitation, the abode, because where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel pitched their tents. And so they abode in their tents, and we should abide in Christ. And that is our link to the New Testament, because the New Testament is written in Greek, so it cannot have a tamid. But there I believe it's the word meno. And we find that in John 1, for example, the Spirit descending from heaven like above upon Christ, and it abode upon him. And John the Baptist, he witnesses about it, upon whom thou shalt see the Spirit descending and remaining on him. And John 6 we read, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give to you. And he that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood dwelleth in me, and I in him. And so if he lives in us and we in him, this union, that is the tamid. And then we abide in him. We have an abode in him. Now, with this knowledge about the tamid, the daily, I believe we will be more able to understand the things talked about in Daniel 8. Where the little horn, it waxes exceedingly great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. The pleasant land is God's people, and it waxes great even to the host of heaven. So it's the host of heaven, that's God's army, God's church on earth. And it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and stamped upon it. So some of the leaders, the pastors, like we talked about in the discussion about the tamid, they will turn against us most likely. Yea, verse 11, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. Who is the prince of the host? The leader of that church. And by him the daily was taken away. The question now, by him, is it a reference to the little horn or to the prince of the host? At the end, it doesn't make a difference, because the prince of the host, he follows the little horn, and so with that, the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So there's no place anymore to worship God the way God's people ought to worship God. And we continue in verse 12. And an host was given him against the daily by reason of transgression. So the host was given either the prince of the host or to the little horn by reason of transgression. He has the people in his hand because they transgressed God's law, and he can force them to do whatever he wants them to do, because of the transgression of God's law. He bought them basically because of that. And if he would reveal their sins, then they would be not having their daily provisions anymore. They would lose their income and their position. And it continues, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. I think it makes it self-explanatory, so they won't believe the truth anymore. And it's quite progressive there, yeah. Then I heard one saint speaking to another saint, said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And we know then the 2,300 days. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And I talked about this earlier and showed you that timeline. The timeline is based on the premise that with the next inauguration of the President of the United States, National Sunday law would be put in place, and that would then go into effect on January 26, 2025, and that would initiate the 1,335-day timeline, which would end then on September 21st, 2028, which would represent then midnight. And if we count back then from midnight, 2,299 days, we would come then to June 6, 2022. That date then marks the beginning of the judgment of the living, which represents the second part of the cleansing of the sanctuary. And we read about this in Ezekiel 9, where a man clothed in linen goes around with a writer's inkhorn and sets a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all the abominations that are done within Jerusalem, in the midst of this, also in the sanctuary. And to the others, that the ones with the slaughter weapons, it is said in mine hearing, we read, Go ye after him through the city, and smite. Let not your eye spare, neither have ye pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women. But come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and at my sanctuary he shall begin. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. So to me that means that the judgment begins with the leadership. And when we look then at Ezekiel 10:13, where it's cried unto them in my hearing, O wheel, that's representing the crisis that comes most likely at the beginning or after the beginning of the 1,335 days, but maybe before. But what will happen then? Yeah, it says in Psalm 83, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind. That psalm reminds me of the vision that's been recorded by Elmer M. Johnson as a Loma Linda train station vision, and where it talks about that a terrible storm of persecution was coming like a windstorm that blew down every standing object. There was not a Seventh-day Adventist to be seen. They, like the disciples, forsook Christ and fled. All who had thought positions were never seen again. And we have to remember that sentence. All who had thought positions were never seen again. And it applied, we read, to the entire denominational world. Regarding the 2300-day prophecy with the cleansing of the sanctuary, we read in the book Evangelism. As a people, we should be earnest students of prophecy. We should not rest until we become intelligent in regard to the subject of the sanctuary, which is brought out in the visions of Daniel and John. This subject sheds great light on our present position and work, and gives us unmistakable proof that God has led us in our past experience. It explains our disappointment in 1844, showing us that the sanctuary to be cleansed was not the earth as we had supposed, but that Christ then entered into the most holy apartment of the heavenly sanctuary and is there performing the closing work of his priestly office in fulfillment of the words of the angel to the prophet Daniel. Unto 2300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So where do we have to look for a fitting event for June 6, 2022? Well, we have to look within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we read on today.org set in motion that June 6/22 was the first day of the first hybrid General Conference session in St. Louis, Missouri. And for the first time, delegates from all over the world could attend and participate in the GC session online and also in person. And in Spectrum magazine we read that Ted N.C. Wilson was re-elected to third term as GC president. We read there, we had an opportunity to discuss several names as potential candidates for the position of the General Conference president. And that's the chair of the nominating committee who said that, Cooper. After discussion, we voted, and the nominating committee has a recommendation to bring. Ted N.C. Wilson was the nominating committee's choice. With no time given for discussion, Abner de los Santos, chair of the evening business session, quickly rushed Wilson's name to a vote. Delegates, both on the floor and attending virtually, had 3 minutes to vote through the election buddy system used for all electronic voting at the session. At the end of the time, the final total flashed on the arena screens. And there was like a split, about 3/4 of the people voted for it, and the result was met with applause, we read. It is interesting to see that he was re-elected for a third term, as normally GC presidents only have 2 terms. He was already in his second term when the COVID crisis hit, and so he was more than 10 years the GC president, and they now decided that he would finish a third term, so that he would be president for a total of 15 years, which has never happened before in Adventist history. And when we read here, no time was given for discussion, and the name from Ted Wilson was quickly rushed through to a vote, we realized that things did not happen they usually happened. Like when the time came to elect other officers for the General Conference, all the ones who were in office and desired to be re-elected, they were voted back in block and not in person. So you could not make a choice to leave one out unless you voted against all of them. In addition, there was a desire of the delegates to discuss the injection that was promoted during the pandemic, but there was no ear found to it, and it seemed that the General Conference promotes the right arm of the Gospel of Babylon, but not the right arm of Christ's Gospel. With that, I do not want to say that the church is Babylon, because we know that there is no message that the Lord would disorganize the church, never any message to apply Babylon and give the loud cry to come out of the church. But we need to plead for the people, just as Moses was pleading for the people. We should cry about the abominations that are being done, according to Ezekiel. Considering now the Loma Linda train station vision, we have to realize that all who had thought positions were never seen again. Makes me wonder if we see that president in the long run again. Because we read, after the storm there was a calm. Then the Adventists arose like a great flock of sheep, but there were no shepherds. They all waited in earnest prayer for help and wisdom, and the Lord answered by helping them to choose leaders from among them who had never thought positions before. And then they prayed earnestly for the Holy Spirit, which was poured out upon them, making them fully ready for service. So this is now the time, just like the disciples after Christ ascended, after he ascended, they were praying earnestly for the Holy Spirit, and then at Pentecost the early rain was poured out. And this is probably a reference to the outpouring of the latter rain. In the book The Great Controversy, we read about the time when the hour of judgment has come. And in reference to Revelation 14, 6 and 7, the first angel's message where it talks about the hour of his judgment has come, we read, "The message itself sheds light as to the time when this movement is to take place. It declared to be a part of the everlasting gospel, and it announces the opening of the judgment. The message of salvation has been preached in all ages, but this message is a part of the gospel which could be proclaimed only in the last days, for only then would it be true that the hour of judgment had come. The prophecies present a succession of events leading down to the opening of the judgment, and these events I showed you already. This is especially true of the book of Daniel, but that part of his prophecy which related to the last days, Daniel had bidden to close up and seal to the time of the end. Not till we reach this time could a message concerning the judgment be proclaimed, based on the fulfillment of these prophecies. But at the time of the end, says the prophet, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. And I believe that the hour of judgment has come now. This is prophecy fulfilled in front of our eyes. And as the judgment is going forward, we read in the book of Evangelism, God's people are now to have their eyes fixed on the heavenly sanctuary, where the final ministration of our great high priest in the work of the judgment is going forward, where he is interceding for his people. But the intercession will close soon. So with all the events happening within the Adventist Church right now, I believe we can truly say that June 6, 2022 was the beginning of the judgment of the living. Ever since, it's been clear that the leadership, I can say, has been feeding from the table of the king of Babylon, and the sanctuary and host have been trodden underfoot. And it has been pointed out to me when we look at the date of June 6, 2026, we see 6, 6, and 2 plus 2 plus 2 is also 6. So we are looking here at a representation of 6, 6, 6. And that is very scary. But then, if we consider Daniel 8, verse 11, that the little horn magnifies himself even to the prince of the host, that means to the leader of God's army, then we see that this is just a fulfillment of what Daniel saw in the vision. And reading at the end of the verse, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, isn't the sanctuary our body? And by promoting an injection that destroys the image of God by putting the DNA of one species into the human body, that's insulting God. And so with that, the place of God's sanctuary has been cast down. If he would have given ear to the commandments of God and kept his statutes, then the promise would have been true, that he will put none of these diseases upon us, which he has brought upon the Egyptians. But we did not pay attention to his statutes. In Leviticus 19:19 it says, "Ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed." And that's talking about the mixing of genes. And with this last injection, that happened though. And the temple of God was, cast down. It is very sad to see all this, but like Christ said in Luke 21:28, when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. So we can praise God that we are coming to the end. Yeah, like Daniel says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1335 days. With that, I like to encourage you to subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss the next part that will most likely describe all the different parts of the timelines falling into place in regards to end time events as I see it. Of course, I'm a human being and I make mistakes, but I see so many things in here that I can't help but believe that there must be truth in it. Give it a thumbs up, even though it's difficult to do it. It's a hard message, and maybe hit the announcement button so that you don't miss the next part. May God bless you as we enter probably this valley very soon. By the way, the thumbs up button is supposed to help spread the message. And as people should think about this and see if this is the truth, I think it would be worthwhile to do that.